Greetings and welcome. We are in 303, and our objective now for the hour is to introduce you to the Platonic dialogue apology. There's a number of ways to introduce Plato. And, one of the really cardinal ways to do this is to ask, who is Plato's great teacher, Socrates? And that's probably a place for us to start your notes. Now, you have already in front of you found online at sacredtext.com the apology by a translator named Jowett. We're going to be working with that here in a moment. You have a blank sheet of paper in front of you where you've drawn a line down the center of the page, and on the left-hand side at the top you've put Socrates' accusers' arguments, and then on the right-hand side of that line you're going to put Socrates' apology. Now let's define that word, apology. Today when we use the word apology, we mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. That is not originally what the word meant at all. The word rather meant a formal defense for actions committed. Okay? So in other words, if you gave your apology, you weren't saying, I'm sorry, but rather you were saying, let me explain to you why I did what I did. Okay? In other words, you're not admitting any kind of wrong normally in an apology, but rather you're going to argue that you are right. Okay? So in that right-hand column, as we flow this dialogue, we're going to be asking ourselves this question. How does Socrates defend himself against the different accusations that are made at him? Now, we should point out that the final days of Socrates is a series of 4 dialogues, okay, of which apology is just one. The actual first dialogue is a dialogue called Euthyphro. Only called that because Socrates has a conversation with a guy named Euthyphro right outside of the courtroom, where they spend some time discussing back and forth about what it means for something to be right or wrong. For example, the question is asked, is it right to do a certain act because the gods say it's right? Or do the gods say it's right to do a certain act because it's right? Chicken or egg argument. And in the Euthyphro dialogue, this is at the heart of the argument, okay? A son is bringing his father to trial, etc., etc., okay? The second, then, of the 4 dialogues is the one we're looking at now, apology, where Socrates, as a really old man, is brought up in front of the Athenian people, and he's going to be accused. There's 3 things that happen in this dialogue, if you want to jot this down in terms of the large schemata. 1, these accusations are made. 2, Socrates will make his defense. 3, let's go ahead and just, ruin the end of the movie for you. Socrates is found guilty. Of course, we are in 399 BCE, and ultimately his guilty charge, his guilty verdict will lead to his, I was going to say untimely death, but Socrates makes the joke that when you're as old as I am, you're expected to die anyway. What difference does it make how you go? Socrates is then going to be imprisoned, and there's a certain period of time in which he is not yet killed. Okay, he's going to be drinking this poison, hemlock. And that's the 3rd dialogue called the Crito. And Crito is just, again, another person where Crito will come to Socrates and say, hey, good news, I've paid off the guard and we've found a way to get you out of prison so you don't have to die in prison. In other words, this is your get out of jail card free pass, if you will. The only problem is that Socrates, A, can't live in Athens ever again, and B, well, he's going to make the argument in Crito he's breaking the law. And if he breaks the law, then isn't he worthy of punishment by the state? Yeah, Crito will say, but the guilty verdict was kind of wrong. I mean, but Socrates will come back and say, wait a minute, if we're going to do the right thing, then you do the right thing whether people have treated you wrongly or not. Through the course of the argument, Crito ultimately has to admit that although he doesn't like it, Socrates' argument is sound. And so, at the end of Crito, we realize that Socrates is doomed to die. He's not going to escape, even though he has the opportunity to do so. The 4th and final of the final days of Socrates' dialogues, and these are sometimes treated as a unit of 4, okay, is, of course, the great Phaedo. Phaedo tells the final moments of the death of Socrates. Phaedo is the classic argument for the existence of soul. Okay, that's the big argument in this one. Socrates is unafraid of dying. In fact, he's joking about it. We're told he keeps laughing. And his students are like, Why aren't you more sad? And his comment is, well, if you believe in soul, well, then there's no reason to be afraid of dying if you've lived a good life. Well, the argument obviously is now, well, how do you know you have a soul? How do you maybe think you're not just mistaken? And Socrates will make the quote-unquote argument for soul. Okay? Now, this argument for soul becomes really, really important to the group of thinkers that we call the Neoplatonists, who ultimately are Christian thinkers who follow in the strain of the great Christian theologian St. Augustine. Okay? And the arguments then for the existence of soul are going to become really important in Christian theology, coming down the line later. All right? Now to Socrates and to apology. You're going to have, as I already said, you're going to have basically kind of three movements of this dialogue. First, we're going to hear Socrates talk about these accusations that have been made against him. We don't just simply want to outline these accusations as he's basically an atheist and he's corrupting the youth. That's usually the way, and you can even write that down because that's the bigger picture. That's usually the argument as it's reduced to 2 lines. Simple. If you really want to convict somebody and you want to get them in serious trouble as a teacher, say 2 things about them. Call them an atheist, and of course say that they're ruining youth. They should not be with students. If you want to destroy a teacher, even today, that's a good way to do it. Okay, so there you go. You now have the key to know how to take down any of your teachers. Call them atheists and say that they're corrupters of youth. That's the easy out. What we want to write down as we study this dialogue closely is what specifically does these 2 terms really mean? Like, what exactly is he being accused of? Underline the word exactly. Because we're not going to hear Miletus and the rest of these guys actually say these accusations so much out loud, but rather Socrates saying what they're saying about him. Okay, so that's our first insight. The second thing that we're going to be paying attention to is how Socrates then responds to these accusations. Question, does he deny them? Does he agree with them, but then play language games, as we'll often see Socrates doing in our study of Republic? And don't be mistaken, we're studying apology so that we can study Republic. Understand that we're then working in a reverse order. We're dealing with a dialogue that's written about Socrates at the end of his life. Republic, of course, is going to be one of the great dialogues that represent Socrates in the middle third of his life, basically, or near the end of his life, but before he goes to trial, okay? So we're going to come back to study Republic after we look at apology. Well, why would we do that? Because apology is a great way for you to learn Socratic dialectic. So let's go ahead and write that term down. This is going to be a term we'll use a lot in our conversations. Socratic, ever relating to Socrates. Dialectic, give and take, argument, the use of language. Okay? And while apology is one of the shorter of the dialogues, Republic obviously anything but short, right? We'll still point out that Socrates takes a lot of words to say what it is he has to say. What is up with that? And in many ways, what we're really looking at is the birth of Western dialectic thought. Why is it, for example, that politicians love to give these speeches all the time, for example, in a famous city called D.C.? What's up with that? Well, the argument is going to take us all the way back to the Athenians, who really did understand the power of language and the manipulation of language. The one group that Socrates loathes more than any other is the group called the Sophists. This group of people, today we would think of them as almost like lawyers, who will argue either side of a position depending on who's paying. They really don't care about right and wrong. They care about drachma, money, right? Making the next drachma, if you will. For Socrates, he loathes this idea. He's going to argue that there are certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong. Now, let's get it out of the way now. The classic line from Apology is, of course, the unexamined life is not worth living. It's a famous line. He'll say it near the end of the dialogue, and by the time we get there, that's going to be for us, of course, a high moment. Now, there's been a number of thinkers who have lectured on Plato, who have said that really, when you look at what Plato does with Socrates, he creates the mythology of a man, of his teacher, okay? Because Socrates never wrote anything down. Karl Jaspers, the great philosopher, points out the similarities between Socrates and Jesus Christ. Both of them, for example, live lives as teachers, but they never actually write anything down. In fact, there's an argument that both of them were illiterate and did not know how to write. Certainly there's this argument with Socrates, who to our knowledge never wrote anything down. Gets in lots of trouble, ultimately has to come in front of some kind of tribunal, and is asked to defend actions that for us seem kind of silly. Sitting at the mall asking questions is going to land you in jail drinking hemlock. This seems kind of dumb to us today, but it tells us something about the culture that produced these texts, right? They care very deeply about ideas, and maybe we want to write that down with a capital I even. Ideas matter, if you will, okay? And the way we get to those ideas, and what ideas young people especially are going to be taught, what we call pedagogy. That's really important, right? What are we going to say to kids? How are we going to help kids know how to grow up? Well, Socrates is very interested in this idea, and so he does his talking. In the end, interestingly, Socrates gives a defense of his life, where Jesus Christ in our stories in the Gospels really does not. In fact, he's kind of applauded in some circles for not giving a defense, for kind of just remaining silent. In other words, he clearly is innocent. It's clearly trumped up charges, and he clearly is being accused falsely, and he's going to die falsely. Socrates is going to die too, but before he dies, he's going to use it as a teachable moment. He's going to make some observations, okay? So here we go. We're now ready to listen to a reading by this text. We're going to follow along, and as we follow along, we're going to pay close attention now to those two things. What are the accusations being made? And number two, how does Socrates defend himself in detail? You want to try to be as detailed as you can as you work through it. You've got the dialogue in front of you. My hope is this is your second reading of the dialogue, of a second translator, so you ought to be able now to work pretty quickly through this information. All right? The Apology of Plato.
Apology is Plato's account of Socrates' spoken defense at his trial some weeks later. The citizens who brought the charges against him were the poet Miletus, the rhetorician Lycon, and a politician of the recently restored democratic government, Anytus. It's clear that the particular charges against Socrates were trumped up through a feeling of general animosity, for he was a sincerely religious man. But the unorthodox Socrates was an advocate of the voice of the wise as opposed to the voice of the many, and so was considered by some a threat to the new regime. And now, Plato's Apology of Socrates, narrated by Donald Donnelly.
How you, O Athenians, have been affected by my accusers, I cannot tell. But I know that they almost made me forget who I was, so persuasively did they speak, and yet they have hardly uttered a word of truth. But of the many falsehoods told by them, there was one which quite amazed me. I mean when they said that you should be upon your guard and not allow yourselves to be deceived by the force of my eloquence. To say this, when they were certain to be detected as soon as I opened my lips and proved myself anything but a great speaker, did indeed appear to me most shameless, unless by force of eloquence they mean the force of truth. For if such is their meaning, I admit that I am eloquent. But in how different a way from theirs? Well, as I was saying, they have scarcely spoken the truth at all. But from me you shall hear the whole truth, not, however, delivered after their manner, in a set oration duly ornamented with words and phrases. No, by heaven, but I shall use the words and arguments which occur to me at the moment, for I am confident in the justice of my cause. At my time of life, I ought not to be appearing before you, O men of Athens, in the character of a juvenile orator. Let no one expect it of me. And I must beg of you to grant me a favor. If I defend myself in my accustomed manner, and you hear me using the words which I have been in the habit of using in the agora, at the tables of the money changers, or anywhere else, I would ask you not to be surprised, and not to interrupt me on this account. For I am more than 70 years of age, and appearing now for the first time in a court of law. I am quite a stranger to the language of the place, and therefore I would have you regard me as if I were really a stranger, whom you would excuse if he spoke in his native tongue, and after the fashion of his country. Am I making an unfair request of you? Never mind the manner, which may or may not be good, but think only of the truth of my words, and give heed to that. Let the speaker speak truly, and the judge decide justly. And first I have to reply to the older charges and to my first accusers, and then I will go on to the later ones. For of old I have had many accusers who have accused me falsely to you during many years, and I am more afraid of them than of Anytus and his associates, who are dangerous too in their own way. But far more dangerous are the others who began when you were children and took possession of your minds with their falsehoods. Telling of one Socrates, a wise man who speculated about the heaven above and searched into the earth beneath, and made the worse appear the better cause. The disseminators of this tale are the accusers whom I dread, for their hearers are apt to fancy that such inquirers do not believe in the existence of the gods. And they are many, and their charges against me are of ancient date, and they were made by them in the days when you were more impressible than you are now, in childhood, or it may have been in youth, and the cause when heard went by default, for there was none to answer. And hardest of all, I do not know and cannot tell the names of my accusers, unless in the chance case of a comic poet. All who from envy and malice have persuaded you, some of them having first convinced themselves, all this class of men are most difficult to deal with, for I cannot have them up here and cross-examine them, and therefore I must simply fight with shadows in my own defense, and argue when there is no one who answers. I will ask you then to assume with me, as I was saying, that my opponents are of two kinds, one recent, the other ancient. And I hope that you will see the propriety of my answering the latter first, for these accusations you heard long before the others, and much oftener. Well then, I must make my defense, and endeavor to clear away in a short time a slander which has lasted a long time. May I succeed, if to succeed be for my good and yours, or likely to avail me in my cause. The task is not an easy one. I quite understand the nature of it, and so, leaving the event with God, in obedience to the law, I will now make my defense. I will begin at the beginning, and ask what is the accusation which has given rise to the slander of me, and in fact has encouraged Miletus to prefer this charge against me. Well, what do the slanderers say? They shall be my prosecutors, and I will sum up their words in an affidavit. Socrates is an evildoer and a curious person who searches into things under the earth and in heaven, and he makes the worse appear the better cause, and he teaches the aforesaid doctrines to others. Such is the nature of the accusation. It is just what you have yourselves seen in the comedy of Aristophanes, who has introduced a man whom he calls Socrates, going about and saying that he walks in air, and talking a deal of nonsense concerning matters of which I do not pretend to know either much or little. Not that I mean to speak disparagingly of anyone who is a student of natural philosophy. I should be very sorry if Miletus could bring so grave a charge against me. But the simple truth is, O Athenians, that I have nothing to do with physical speculations. Very many of those here present are witnesses to the truth of this, and to them I appeal. Speak then, you who have heard me, and tell your neighbors whether any of you have ever known me hold forth in few words or in many upon such matters. You hear their answer, and from what they say of this part of the charge, you will be able to judge of the truth of the rest. As little foundation is there for the report that I am a teacher and take money. This accusation has no more truth in it than the other. Although, if a man were really able to instruct mankind, to receive money for giving instruction would, in my opinion, be an honor to him. There is Gorgias of Leontium, and Prodicus of Ceos, and Hippias of Elis, who go around the cities and are able to persuade the young men to leave their own citizens by whom they might be taught for nothing, and come to them whom they not only pay, but are thankful if they may be allowed to pay them. There is, at this time, a Parian, philosopher residing in Athens, of whom I have heard, and I came to hear of him in this way. I came across a man who has spent a world of money on the sophists, Callias, the son of Hipponicus, and knowing that he had sons, I asked him, Callias, I said, if your 2 sons were foals or calves, there would be no difficulty in finding someone to put over them. We should hire a trainer of horses, or a farmer, probably, who would improve and perfect them in their own proper virtue and excellence. But as they are human beings, whom are you thinking of placing over them? Is there anyone who understands human and political virtue?
Now, this you want for your notes to say is his example from argument from analogy. We're going to see this a lot in Socrates' arguments. In other words, this man has sons. If you had ponies, how would you raise those ponies? Raising sons is like raising ponies. This is an argument from analogy. We're going to see it a lot. And when we start seeing it, we want to point it out to ourselves right away. Always asking, yeah, but are they the same thing? Raising ponies and raising sons. 1 or 2 of us could argue otherwise.
You must have thought about the matter, for you have sons. Is there anyone? There is, he said. Who is he? I said. And of what country, and what does he charge? Evenus, the Parian, he replied. He is the man, and his charge is 5 minae. Happy is Evenus, I said to myself, if he really has this wisdom and teaches at such a moderate charge. Had I the same, I should have been very proud and conceited, but the truth is that I have no knowledge of the kind. I dare say, Athenians, that someone among you will reply, yes, Socrates, but what is the origin of these accusations which are brought against you? There must have been something strange which you have been doing. All these rumors and this talk about you would never have arisen if you'd been like other men. Tell us then, what is the cause of them, for we should be sorry to judge hastily of you. Now, I regard this as a fair challenge, and I will endeavor to explain to you the reason why I am called wise and have such an evil fame. Please to attend, then. And although some of you may think that I am joking, I declare that I will tell you the entire truth. Men of Athens, this reputation of mine has come of a certain sort of wisdom which I possess. If you ask me what kind of wisdom, I reply, wisdom such as may perhaps be attained by man. For to that extent I am inclined to believe that I am wise. Whereas the persons of whom I was speaking have a superhuman wisdom, which I may fail to describe because I have it not myself. And he who says that I have speaks falsely and is taking away my character. And here, O men of Athens, I must beg you not to interrupt me, even if I seem to say something extravagant. For the word which I will speak is not mine. I will refer you to a witness who is worthy of credit. The witness shall be the god of Delphi. He will tell you about my wisdom, if I have any, and of what sort it is. You must have known Chaerephon. He was early a friend of mine, and also a friend of yours, for he shared in the recent exile of the people and returned with you. Well, Chaerephon, as you know, was very impetuous in all his doings, and he went to Delphi and boldly asked the oracle to tell him whether, as I was saying, I must beg you not to interrupt. He asked the oracle to tell him whether anyone was wiser than I was. And the Pythian prophetess answered that there was no man wiser. Chaerephon is dead himself, but his brother, who is in court, will confirm the truth of what I am saying. Why do I mention this? Because I am going to explain to you why I have such an evil name. When I heard the answer, I said to myself, what can the god mean? And what is the interpretation of this riddle? For I know that I have no wisdom, small or great. What then can he mean when he says that I am the wisest of men? And yet he is a god and cannot lie. That would be against his nature. After long consideration, I thought of a method of trying the question. I reflected that if I could only find a man wiser than myself, then I might go to the god with a refutation in my hand. I should say to him, here is a man who is wiser than I am. But you said that I was the wisest. Accordingly, I went to one who had the reputation of wisdom and observed him. His name I need not mention. He was a politician whom I selected for examination, and the result was as follows. When I began to talk to him, I could not help thinking that he was not really wise, although he was thought wise by many, and still wiser by himself. And thereupon I tried to explain to him that he thought himself wise, but was not really wise, and the consequence was that he hated me, and his enmity was shared by several who were present and heard me. So I left him, saying to myself as I went away, well, although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing, and thinks that he knows. I neither know, nor think that I know. In this latter particular, then, I seem to have slightly the advantage of him. Then I went to another who had still higher pretensions to wisdom, and my conclusion was exactly the same. Whereupon I made another enemy of him, and of many others besides him. Then I went to one man after another, being not unconscious of the enmity which I provoked, and I lamented and feared this, but necessity was laid upon me. The word of God, I thought, ought to be considered first, and I said to myself, go I must to all who appear to know, and find out the meaning of the oracle. And I swear to you, Athenians, by the dog I swear, for I must tell you the truth, the result of my mission was just this. I found that the men most in repute were all but the most foolish, and that others less esteemed were really wiser and better. I will tell you the tale of my wanderings, and of the Herculean labors, as I may call them, which I endured only to find at last the oracle irrefutable. After the politicians, I went to the poets, tragic, dithyrambic, and all sorts. And there, I said to myself, you will be instantly detected. Now you will find out that you are more ignorant than they are. Accordingly, I took them some of the most elaborate passages in their own writings, and asked what was the meaning of them, thinking that they would teach me something. Will you believe me? I am almost ashamed to confess the truth, but I must say that there is hardly a person present who would not have talked better about their poetry than they did themselves. Then I knew that not by wisdom do poets write poetry, but by a sort of genius and inspiration. They are like diviners or soothsayers, who also say many fine things, but do not understand the meaning of them. The poets appeared to me to be much in the same case, and I further observed that upon the strength of their poetry they believed themselves to be the wisest of men in other things in which they were not wise. So I departed, conceiving myself to be superior to them for the same reason that I was superior to the politicians. At last I went to the artisans, for I was conscious that I knew nothing at all, as I may say, and I was sure that they knew many fine things. And here I was not mistaken, for they did know many things of which I was ignorant, and in this they certainly were wiser than I was. But I observed that even the good artisans fell into the same error as the poets. Because they were good workmen, they thought that they also knew all sorts of high matters, and this defect in them overshadowed their their wisdom, and therefore I asked myself on behalf of the oracle whether I would like to be as I was, neither having their knowledge nor their ignorance, or like them in both. And I made answer to myself and to the oracle that I was better off as I was. This inquisition has led to my having many enemies of the worst and most dangerous kind, and has given occasion also to many calumnies. And I am called wise, for my hearers always imagine that I myself possess the wisdom, which I find wanting in others. But the truth is, O men of Athens, that God only is wise, and by his answer he intends to show that the wisdom of men is worth little or nothing. He is not speaking of Socrates. He is only using my name by way of illustration, as if he said, "He, O men, is the wisest, who, like Socrates, knows that his wisdom is in truth worth nothing." And so I go about the world, obedient to the God, and search and make inquiry into the wisdom of anyone, whether citizen or stranger, who appears to be wise. And if he is not wise, then, in vindication of the oracle, I show him that he is not wise. And my occupation quite absorbs me, and I have no time to give either to any public matter of interest or to any concern of my own. But I am in utter poverty by reason of my devotion to the God.
So we'll pause there. We are now into the first third, obviously, of his defense. We're listening to him give the arguments that, notice, are going to kind of take into consideration his entire life, not just these accusations that have been somewhat immediate, but also what it is that he's done for a very, very long time. And we'll have to decide on our own whether we think that Socrates is legitimate or not in his defense of what it is that he's doing. Come back for our next session and we will continue. Make a note to yourself right now where you are so that you'll know how to come back.